Before proceeding, viewers are advised to exercise caution. The following is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. This is a verbatim reproduction of testimony in federal court in the case of Sean Diddy Combs, as reported by Inner City Press. The trial against Sean Diddy Combs, a well-known musician and producer, reached a new level of tension on the third day of hearings. On this day, an audio recording was played in the courtroom for the first time, featuring the voice of Prince, the world-famous and legendary musician whose death several years ago shook the music world. When the recording began to play over the loudspeakers, everyone in the courtroom sensed that something important was happening. Combs' face, which had been calm and composed until that moment, suddenly changed. His usual confidence disappeared, and it was clear that he was shaken. This reaction did not go unnoticed, as he is usually good at hiding his emotions, especially in such tense situations. It was a real sensation for everyone, because no one expected to hear Prince's voice in this case. This recording turned out to be unexpected but very strong evidence that could greatly influence the course of the trial. It brought new information to the case that could potentially change the minds of the judges and jury. At that moment, it became clear that the case was taking a completely different turn, and everyone was eagerly awaiting further developments. The case, which centered on Sean Diddy Combs, involved very serious allegations. He was suspected of domestic violence. One of the key moments in the trial was the testimony of Cassie Ventura, who appeared as a witness. She described in detail what she personally witnessed, saying that she saw Diddy use physical force against someone. Her words played an important role because it is precisely this kind of testimony that helps to understand what was happening behind closed doors. The prosecution linked these allegations to the fact that Diddy threw private parties that were different from the usual celebrity gatherings. According to several witnesses, suspicious and possibly even illegal things happened at these events. It is particularly noteworthy that there were no security guards at these parties, which set them apart from other parties where security and the presence of officials are usually strictly monitored. The lack of security created an atmosphere of complete freedom but at the same time increased danger. This gave reason to believe that events that no one wanted to publicize could have taken place at these gatherings. And it was in this environment, according to the prosecution, that violence could have occurred. Cassie Ventura's testimony and the details of these private parties became one of the key factors around which the entire court case was built. On the day when the audio recording with Prince's voice was to be presented in court, the atmosphere in the courtroom was tense to the point of breaking. The courtroom was overflowing with people. There were many more people than usual. The audience could literally feel that something important and fateful was about to happen. There were twice as many security guards as usual, which only added to the feeling that everyone was preparing for a big event. Such a large number of security guards does not just create an impression of security. It seems to say that something very serious is at stake. When the judge entered the courtroom, his appearance immediately made the atmosphere even more solemn. He clearly and sternly reminded everyone present of the need to maintain order and respect for the court. This warning was not just a formality. It added tension and a sense that this was not a place for light conversation or jokes. After that, the prosecutor began, as usual, with a brief overview of the evidence already presented to remind everyone how it all began and where the case was headed. But then, completely unexpectedly, he asked for a special audio recording to be played. The last private recording of Prince's voice, made just a few weeks before his death. This move came as a real surprise to everyone. No one expected this piece of evidence to be part of the trial. It was this recording that promised to change the perception of the case and capture the attention of everyone in the courtroom. This audio recording of Prince's voice was truly unique evidence. We were used to hearing Prince as a bright, confident star on stage. His voice was loud, expressive, and artistic. But in this recording, he sounded completely different. Quiet, cautious, almost whispering, as if he was afraid someone might overhear him. This was not an artist, but a man sharing his true feelings and fears. Prince recorded these notes for himself because he didn't know who else he could trust. He clearly wanted to preserve evidence of what happened at Diddy's parties. In his monologue, he described in detail the atmosphere that reigned at these private events, the noise, the behavior of the guests, the tense moments he witnessed with his own eyes. He didn't just talk about his general impressions, but gave exact dates and locations. This gave his words extra weight because the notes couldn't be dismissed as vague or speculative. He named specific people who were there and described how they behaved. Most importantly, Prince said that what was happening was not just inappropriate or strange, but a real crime. His voice sounded frightened and concerned, as if he wanted to warn or help stop what was happening. When the recording was played in the courtroom, the atmosphere changed dramatically. The entire room seemed to freeze. Everyone listened intently, as if they themselves were witnessing what Prince was talking about. Diddy's lawyers, who had been confident up to that point, suddenly lost control. Their eyes began to wander. They started to stumble over their words, which was noticeable to everyone. This meant that the evidence was working against them and was affecting the morale of the defense. Diddy himself looked completely different than usual. His face turned pale, and his usually confident and calm movements gave way to nervousness. His hands trembled slightly. He bit his lips, trying to hide his emotions, but it was clear that he was shaken inside. And it wasn't just his facial expressions that gave him away. At one point, he pushed his lawyer's hand away so sharply that all the jurors noticed, and the gesture seemed like he was about to break down under the pressure. Earlier, throughout the trial, Diddy had seemed completely composed and unruffled. He seemed to know how to keep everything under control without giving in to his nerves. But at that moment, when Prince's voice rang out through the speakers, his confidence crumbled like a house of cards. It was a clear reaction to how hard the recording hit his defense. Prince was very detailed and specific in his recording. He mentioned certain events that could be verified, such as a party in December 2015. According to him, the party was attended by well-known celebrities who had previously denied in court that they were there. This created serious problems for the defense because it meant that witnesses could be deliberately concealing the truth. In addition, Prince talked about his personal conversations with Diddy. He tried to convince him to stop what was happening, probably referring to the violent or criminal acts at the parties, but in response, Prince heard only ridicule and threats. This sounded particularly alarming because it showed that Diddy had no intention of changing and saw the warnings as an excuse for mockery rather than a reason to change his behavior. When the recording mentioned the specific address of one of the private meetings in Beverly Hills, there was a real outburst of emotion in the courtroom. Diddy suddenly stood up abruptly, causing panic among his security guards and lawyers. They tried to sit him back down, but it was clear that he was losing control. The atmosphere became extremely tense, and everyone felt that the situation was getting out of control. A few moments later, Diddy finally lost it and shouted loudly that all the charges were lies. His shout was so loud that the judge had no choice but to intervene and immediately warned him to maintain order and respect the court. This moment was very vivid and memorable for everyone in the courtroom. It was a clear breakdown of a man who had previously carefully hidden his emotions and who was under intense pressure from the evidence he had heard. The whole scene left a deep impression on everyone in the courtroom. No one could remain indifferent. The atmosphere was so tense and emotional that it seemed as if time had stopped for a moment. The recording of Prince's voice became a real turning point in the trial. It was like an invisible but very powerful witness who spoke for himself and required no further explanation. This recording showed that the prosecution had evidence that could not simply be ignored or refuted with words. It revealed details that had previously been hidden, and it became clear that the case was much more serious than it had seemed at first glance. Thanks to this recording, the court and the jury were able to see what was happening from a different perspective, through the eyes of someone who was close to the events and willing to tell the truth. As a result, the entire trial took on a new dynamic. It was now clear that the rest of the trial would take a completely different turn, and all attention was focused on how the defense would try to deal with this unexpected and powerful evidence. This scene became one of the most memorable moments of the entire trial, and showed that no matter how complicated the process, the truth will eventually come out. Okay, let me explain in more detail. The story of the freak-offs, special parties that Diddy used to throw, had long remained in the shadows and spawned many rumors and speculations. People discussed who was actually there, what happened, and how far these events could have gone. One of the strangest and most unexpected questions that arose among the public was the involvement of some minors in the affair. This, of course, seemed strange and even absurd, but in such cases, completely unexpected versions often emerge that attempt to explain what does not fit into the usual understanding. In addition, many wondered why celebrities who were rumored to have been at these parties are still trying to keep their participation under wraps. Why are they hiding? unwilling to talk about it. The reason is most likely not that they are afraid of being exposed, but that no one wants to be associated with Diddy. He is a complex and controversial figure surrounded by scandals and intrigue. Even if someone simply attended one of his white parties, it could be a reason for discontent or even problems with their reputation. That is why many stars simply prefer to stay away and not associate with him publicly. There were people in the court who came forward and claimed that nothing unusual happened at these parties. They tried to dispel suspicions and reduce tensions. But as soon as the judge restored order in the courtroom after the heated emotions, the prosecution played the recording of Prince's voice again. And that's when the most important part began. Prince didn't just use generalities. In the recording, he made 3 very specific and clear accusations that dealt a serious blow to Diddy's defense. He talked about events that could be verified, gave details, dates, names, and described what he saw with his own eyes. These 3 points, specific facts, suddenly became the main evidence for the prosecution, which was difficult to refute. The first point concerned a specific party where aggressive and dangerous actions took place, which no one had previously spoken about so openly. The second was threats and pressure on people who tried to speak out against what was happening. The third was details of how these actions were covered up to avoid responsibility. These allegations immediately changed the mood in the courtroom. The defense found itself in a difficult position because now it had to do more than just refute rumors. It had to respond to clear, well-documented facts. The whole story took a new, more serious and dramatic turn. Prince said that for many years he had been secretly gathering evidence of suspicious behavior in the music industry. This was not something spontaneous. He had been systematically keeping records and gathering information since 2007. He explained that he had precise details, the dates and times of events, who exactly was present at those events, and what happened there. These were detailed notes and audio recordings made by him personally, as if he were acting as a private investigator. In the courtroom, the lawyers exchanged glances. Yeesh. It was clear that these were not just random observations or rumors. This was the meticulous work of someone who really understood the music industry and knew how it worked from the inside. Prince didn't just describe what he saw. He documented a whole network of connections, events, and actions that had previously been hidden from the public eye. This gave his testimony particular strength and gravitas. With such a level of preparation and systematic approach, it was much more difficult to refute his statements. Such depth and accuracy of information strengthened the prosecution's case and showed that the case went far beyond mere accusations. It was a genuine attempt to uncover the whole truth about events that had previously been carefully concealed. The first real bombshell in Prince's account was his detailed description of the parties that took place at Diddy's homes. He said that these were not just ordinary parties with music and fun. According to him, these events were carefully planned traps. Diddy deliberately separated young artists from their teams, managers, assistants, friends, and left them alone with himself or with other people, creating a situation from which it was almost impossible for them to escape. Prince named a specific mansion in Beverly Hills where these parties took place and described its layout in detail, the location of the rooms, corridors, and places where guests usually gathered. His description matched the floor plans of the house that had already been presented in court as evidence. This made his words particularly convincing because he was not speaking abstractly but about real places that could be verified. When Prince spoke about this, a tense silence fell over the courtroom. Everyone understood how serious and frightening it sounded. He was genuinely upset when he talked about how young artists are manipulated, how they are misled into thinking they have been given a big break, but in reality they are falling into a dangerous trap from which it is difficult to escape. Prince claimed that he had personally witnessed this happen to at least 7 young artists, people he knew and cared about. This added a personal and emotional element to the story, showing that he was not just an informant, but someone who had witnessed and understood how serious and tragic it was. The second part of Prince's allegations related to their personal meeting, which took place after the 2016 Grammy Awards, one of the most important musical events of the year. Prince approached Diddy at a time when there were many people around, but despite this, he decided to say what had been bothering him for a long time. He told Diddy directly that he knew what was going on at his parties and around them, the suspicious and dangerous things that were being hidden from the public and the press. Prince demanded that it stop, hoping that Diddy would at least think about it and change his behavior. However, Diddy's reaction was completely different. Instead of listening or apologizing, he simply laughed, a laugh that sounded mocking and even defiant. After that, he told Prince that he wasn't as untouchable as he might think he was. This phrase sounded very threatening, as if Diddy was warning Prince, "Don't get involved in something that's none of your business. Don't try to interfere in something that doesn't concern you. Or there could be consequences." It wasn't just a remark, it was a clear threat. Prince took these words very seriously. He understood that he could be punished for trying to reveal the truth. It was a dangerous situation for him, and he didn't want to remain silent despite the threats. In the courtroom, Diddy's lawyers were clearly stunned. This was unexpected for them. Imagine how difficult it was for them to explain and justify their client's behavior when you hear him threaten another famous artist directly and without any hint of restraint. This part of the recording added even more drama to the case and confirmed that the situation was far from simple, but rather truly conflictual and dangerous. This turn of events made everyone in the courtroom realize that the case went beyond a typical legal proceeding. It was about the power, influence, and fear that surrounded these parties and their organizers. The third accusation made by Prince was the most painful and difficult for the defense. He spoke in great detail about the financial schemes involving Diddy and how several people were allegedly paid large sums of money to keep quiet, so they wouldn't reveal the truth about what was happening at those parties and around them. Prince cited specific figures that sounded impressive. One of these people was paid about $2 million, another about $1.3 million. These amounts were so accurate that they matched the financial reports and documents already submitted to the court. In other words, these were not just empty accusations. Everything was backed up by real evidence. In addition, Prince said that he personally saw signed non-disclosure agreements, documents that legally bound these people to remain silent and not reveal what they knew or saw. It was a whole system built on money and fear that helped hide the real facts from the public and the justice system. Ultimately, this part of the indictment showed that the case was not limited to random or isolated incidents. It was a carefully planned and systematic attempt to hide the truth and preserve power and reputation at the expense of huge sums of money and contracts that stood in the way of the truth. This revelation was a serious blow to Diddy and his defense, because now it was no longer just about moral and ethical violations, but about the actual use of money to silence the truth. As the recording continued, Prince's voice became increasingly somber and tense. He spoke candidly about his fears. He was afraid to go public with these statements because he knew how power worked in the music industry. People like Diddy are protected there, and no one wants to admit that something terrible and dishonest is going on behind closed doors. Prince said that the structure of this power is so strong and unshakable that it is difficult for ordinary people to break through and get the truth out to a wide audience. At the end of the recording, he uttered words that sounded like both a warning and a request. If anything happens to him, make sure this recording and the whole truth get into the right hands. It was not only his personal statement of protection, but also a message to all those who are afraid to speak out, who have been intimidated and cornered. When the recording ended, a deathly silence fell over the courtroom. Everyone realized the importance and weight of what they had heard. The prosecution had done something truly incredible. It had turned Prince into a witness from the grave, who told what no one alive would dare or be able to say. The lead prosecutor simply said, "No further questions." Because after such evidence, there was no room for doubt or further explanation. Everyone understood that the key moment in the case had already happened, and that events would now unfold in light of this powerful testimony. The testimony given in court was so powerful and emotionally charged that the jurors hung on every word. They listened especially closely when the conversation turned to details related to personal life, violence, and emotional experiences. Many jurors took notes trying to remember every detail because they understood that these details could be decisive for the final verdict. Among them were young girls, some of whom could not hold back their tears as they left the courtroom. These girls were experiencing personal tragedy. They had lost their mothers and were now hearing the most harrowing and frightening details about the violence and dangerous situations their loved ones had been involved in. For them, it was not just a court case, it was an experience close to personal tragedy. One of the important aspects of the courtroom discussion was the topic of jealousy. The defense tried to use this to undermine the credibility of Cassie Ventura, a key witness for the prosecution. In particular, the trial mentioned Kim Porter, Diddy's former lover, who was a prominent figure in his life. Defense attorneys questioned the objectivity of Ventura's testimony, claiming that her jealousy of Kim could have influenced her perception of events. Ventura admitted that she knew about family gatherings and celebrations involving Kim's family, and openly stated that she was very jealous. All of this was used to cast doubt on her honesty and motives. In response, the judge made it clear that Ventura would probably not be called to the stand again. Both sides, the prosecution and the defense, wanted to ensure that she had equal time to testify. But it appears that her role in the rest of the trial will be limited, possibly to avoid unnecessary emotional outbursts or delays. And then something very important and noteworthy happened. As soon as the recording of Prince's voice was played, which came as a real shock to everyone, Diddy's defense team abruptly asked the judge for a 15-minute recess. They were clearly in a panic, wanting to consult with their client, come up with a new strategy, or at least collect their thoughts. Usually, Diddy's lawyers were used to getting everything they asked for, and the judges accommodated them, given their influence and status. But this time, the judge refused. He stated that there would be no more breaks today. It was a very significant moment. For the first time in the entire trial, the power and influence of the defense began to crack. The judge made it clear that he would now keep the trial under strict control and would not allow any delays or manipulation of the proceedings. For those present in the courtroom, it was a signal that the defense's power, which had seemed untouchable, was beginning to weaken, and the case was taking a new turn, with the court unwilling to make any concessions. This scene clearly showed a change in dynamics. The game had become much tougher, and everyone understood that a serious struggle for truth and justice lay ahead. The prosecution appeared restrained and confident, as if they were prepared for any turn of events. But the defense, on the contrary, was visibly confused and disoriented. They tried to save face and fight for their client, but the sudden appearance of the recording with Prince's voice was a real blow to them. Such powerful and unexpected evidence disrupted their entire strategy and knocked them off their feet. Their attempts to refute what they had heard seemed increasingly weak and nervous. The judge immediately addressed the jury with a serious warning. He reminded them that despite the emotional weight and shock of what they had heard, their job was to remain objective and not let their feelings influence the verdict. But in legal practice, it is well known that jurors who hear such testimony cannot simply take it and forget it. Not only the essence of the testimony is remembered, but also the emotional impact, and this greatly influences the perception of the case. Security in the courtroom was noticeably tightened. 2 security guards now stood next to Diddy, and there were more security personnel than usual around the perimeter of the room. This created a tense and strained atmosphere, as if something serious was expected to happen. Everyone present felt that the trial had ceased to be a routine formal hearing and had entered a stage of real struggle. For Diddy himself, this day was extremely difficult. Usually confident and reserved, he was covered in sweat and his hands were visibly shaking. He refused to drink water, perhaps trying to control himself and not show weakness, but his face no longer had its usual confidence. His expression became confused and depressed, as if all his strength had left him at the worst possible moment. He no longer looked like the master of the situation, but rather like a man trying to cope with mounting pressure, so far without success. At the very end of the day, the defense attorneys made a desperate attempt. They asked the judge to exclude the recording of Prince's voice from the evidence. They argued that the recording could have been tampered with or falsified, since Prince himself was dead and could not confirm his words in court. This was the defense's last hope to undermine the sudden barrage of evidence against them. But this time, the judge was adamant. He denied the request and made it clear that there would be no further concessions. Legal experts observing the trial immediately understood that this was a turning point. The defense's case began to fall apart before their eyes, and Diddy, once a confident man in control of the situation, became someone who had lost power over it. The truth revealed by Prince's recording was a blow from which he was unable to recover. This changed the dynamics of the trial forever. And one thing was now clear. The defense would no longer be able to play by its own rules, and the battle for the outcome of the case had entered a new, tougher, and more uncompromising phase. The prosecution had this recording at its disposal from the outset, but skillfully kept it in reserve like a secret weapon. They deliberately did not rush to show it right away. Their strategy was to wait until Diddy relaxed and stopped being so cautious. For 4 months, experts carefully examined the audio recording, making sure that it would withstand the most rigorous authenticity tests. After all, any doubt could become a weak point in the case. They studied the voice, the background, and the technical details to leave no room for falsification. In addition, prosecutors closely watched Diddy's behavior in court, tracking when he was most vulnerable. That was when they decided to use their secret weapon. It was like the work of architects who first laid a solid foundation, evidence, witnesses, and facts, then built the walls, documents, and text messages, and finally delivered the most powerful blow, the reproduction of Prince's voice. The perfect combination of all elements made the evidence virtually irrefutable. The prosecutors carefully rehearsed every detail: how and when to play the recording, when to pause, where to look at the jury, how to behave in order to evoke the right emotions and maximize the impact of the recording. In this sense, Prince became the perfect witness, a voice that could not be intimidated, words that could not be doubted. This strategic move was a real blow not only to the jury, but also to public opinion. At a moment when interest in the case was beginning to wane, the prosecution was able to regain the attention of the media and the public, making the story a hot topic once again. It was a masterful move that demonstrated how thoroughly and professionally the investigation and trial had been conducted. After the trial ended, the mood in the courtroom and between the teams was like night and day. The prosecution looked calm and confident, as if they knew they had taken a huge step toward victory. Their faces showed no doubt. On the contrary, they showed determination and even slight satisfaction. The defense, on the other hand, was completely confused. They looked confused and, one might even say, panicked. It was clear that the recording of Prince's voice had seriously shaken their entire strategy. And now, they didn't know how to get out of this situation with any dignity. In just one day, Diddy's image changed beyond recognition. From an influential and powerful magician of the music business, he had become a man whose reputation had literally crumbled before his eyes. Under the weight of Prince's words, a legend who seemed to have spoken from beyond the grave, his position became extremely precarious. It was a defeat that not only undermined his status, but also changed the entire picture of the court case. Everyone understood that nothing would ever be the same again. The recording of Prince's voice became a kind of ghost, leaving the deepest and most painful mark on the case. Now fear reigns in the music industry. No one knows what other secrets may be hidden in Prince's archives. What names and secrets may be revealed in the future remains a mystery, creating an atmosphere of anxiety and tension among everyone connected to the case in one way or another.